Morning, everybody. We've got a fantastic panel set up for you this morning. Scott has arranged, and Medtronic is going to be sharing some of their digital perspective on the road ahead. So first, I'd like to welcome the panel who's going to be joining us today. So first, Jiang, who's the SVP of Global and Digital Innovation at Medtronic. Mark Palmer, who is Research Director and Technical Fellow. And Steve Goetz, who's VP of Technology and Platform Innovation. So Team Medtronic, thanks for joining me this morning. What was a lot of fun was the meetings up before the session we had going back and forth over the last couple of weeks about there's so many things to chat about. What should we chat about? And we've only got 40 minutes, or 38 minutes, so I'll cut to the chase. It's really interesting because Medtronic has had a history of unbelievable innovation. They've led the way in so many discoveries, so many technologies over the decades. And I'm really curious to chat with this panel about how do we stand on the shoulders of the analog accomplishments that Medtronic has had over these decades, and then transition as elegantly as possible into the digital world, because I still don't think anybody's got that figured out yet. We'll dig into that a little bit. I think we're sort of poking into the dark and digital in a good way, and I'm glad we are. So let's open up this digital transition that everybody's talking about. You're leading the way. What does the road in the near term look like? And what does the road in the long term look like?
Yeah, Medtronic was founded back in 1949. Just like HP, I came from HP before I joined Medtronic. It was founded in a small garage in Minneapolis. In the past 73 years, we have been leading and building the world-class, large profile of analog medical device interventional tools. And I think this is the biggest assets we have built, and they made who we are today, the largest leader in Medtech industry. Moving forward, I think just like everybody else, how we modernize, digitize our analog devices, breathing new life, new digital life into our analog devices. As a matter of fact, we already have a lot of digitized, smarter devices, or smallest devices, like the smallest pacemaker today in the whole world. So we'll continue to modernize our existing capability portfolio in the near term. At the same time, we will also think big. What's next? What's possible in the next 5, 10, 15 years ahead of us? So what more we can do beyond digitization of our medical interventional tools, creating a digital version of who we have been. There is a lot more to be done there.
And Steve and Mark, question for both of you. Mark, we'll start with you. As you look at the portfolio that Medtronic has, and again, I'm going to continue to ping off of how do we transition from an analog world to a digital world, and how do we as constructively cannibalize our analog world and answer to shareholders and answer to leadership. How do we do that? What do you think about as you're looking at a new technology, and where can we scale this?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Joe. So I keep thinking back to my football coach, American football, while we're doing push-ups in the mud. We'd walk around saying, it's a great day to be alive. I feel a little bit like that now. We're doing push-ups in the mud, trying to figure out how to stay competitive and how to transition to that next tier of competition. So we look at our portfolio, and what we see is our mission up to this point had been trying to make the management of disease as transparent or invisible to the patient and those around them as possible. So we created these devices that you'd implant minimally invasive. You wouldn't have a 18-inch scar on your chest. You'd have like something you could cover with a Band-Aid. The device was autonomous. It was doing its own thing inside the body. You didn't have to think about it. But in the digital age, we need that information back. We need that information coming out of the body So what was autonomous and acting on the edge by itself, we need to be able to interact with more dynamically and collect that information. So as May was saying, making our devices smarter, exposing all the rich data that they were collecting and acting on internally, trying to externalize that so that we can enrich the ecosystem.
Steve?
Yeah, I'll try to give a specific example because I don't think it's either or. It's not. There's a lot of win-win here, and I'll jump off of Mark's point. We've been on a journey for many years, finding better and better treatments at the end of care, the end stages of care. So advanced diseases, patients with severe symptoms, and we've used that, can use that as a springboard to learn. So we have data from that population. We typically, historically, have used that data to make those interventional therapies better. So that's great. It's a good day job. However, when we're in those patients with those measures, we learn a lot about other things, like how medications impact those patients, like disease progression, like comorbidities. And so then we can ask the question, well, what happens if we take those learnings upstream and start to use those measures to understand medical management of a patient before they're at that end stage severe symptoms? And so now we're earlier in the disease, and we're thinking about management. There are good examples here. Continuous glucose monitoring lives here, I think. But if we start to learn about those measures earlier and start to think about progression and early symptoms, we can jump forward again. We can start to think about early diagnosis. And now we're getting more patients into a funnel that benefits our day job, making devices, but it's also tremendously beneficial for those patients because their early symptoms are often nonspecific, they're challenging, but they're treatable. And that opens the door to things like neuroprotection or disease progress modification. So if we get in before the damage is done in severe disease, we can start to change that trajectory. So that's great. If we could do that, then we think about a step earlier. So what if we get in, not when a patient has a disease progress, but when they have risk factors for a disease? And now that's the holy grail, that's disease prevention. And that's a big jump to say, hey, we're going to instrument every 40-year-old so we prevent diseases of aging. That's tough. But if you flip that around and say, well, we're already in a population, and how do we walk backwards and start to harvest those opportunities, we start to see great opportunities to manage disease, to diagnose early, and then ultimately to get in and understand these disease processes, the risk factors, and start to prevent. And that would be a valuable thing for us. It would be a good thing for patients. We just need to figure it out.
Well, that's an interesting point, and for all three of you. So forever, the big strategics, let's just call it for today, let's call it Abbott, Medtronic, and J&J. You all have been wrestling, like arm wrestling, for 1 or 2 point swings in market share in all of these different areas. And what I just heard Steve say is instead of fighting for the same pie, there's potentially a larger pie out there.
Yeah.
And that's what we think about the and. So May, as shepherd of the digital portfolio and the thoughts, how do you decide where to start?
Yeah, we have this analogy at Medtronic, right? How do we compete better, exploit our existing assets, capability to compete better in the red ocean, right? But at the same time, to Steve's point, it's not like one or the other. It's really how we continue to explore our capability today, who we are today, and grow more competitive in today's market. But at the same time, how we explore the blue ocean. And our CEO, Jeff Massa, calls it the new world for Medtronic, right? How we dare to go outside, our comfort zone, where we have been playing in the past 73 years, right? And the truth is COVID is changing everybody's life or continue to change our life. COVID has been increasingly pushing healthcare outside the building into virtual home community-based care. So when care is increasingly leaving hospital in everyday world, what is Medtronic's vision and ambition to, follow where the people are and will be, how we dare to go beyond doctors and tools, how we actually expand and activate our superpower in the hospitals and activate them in everyday life. So that's really my new job to be done. But fundamentally, I think it will have both the existing world, and the new world we're building, living in harmony under one roof. Easily said than done, but I think every company is making the effort to do this.
Well, I'll jump on there because the blue oceans are great and there's super opportunities there, but the blue oceans can be used to dilute the red oceans, right? And so if we do this well in a disease like Parkinson's, where we have great late-stage interventions, and I've got some colleagues in the room here who helped create those interventions, that's a nice thing, but we compete with others who have great innovations there. If we can get early in those patients and start to create continuity of data and an ecosystem that tracks that patient from early diagnosis through an intervention, creates candidacy measures that are objective, that has a pull-through into that red ocean. And so we think about it certainly as good standalone opportunities, but we also think about it as continuity of care and ecosystem opportunities that make us very competitive in what we do today, and also prevent disruption by others in the future. So it's not, again, many of these are win-win. It's not either or. If we can find those opportunities where those things overlap, that's a very good place for big medtech to play.
So LSI, Scott's put on this, and this is innovators and creators of new technologies. We know strategics are exceptionally good at a few things and not as good as others these days. And that's the way the world should be. We trade on inequality. That's what the capitalist system does. And right, distribution, sales, service, iteration on the innovation. But we're in a really interesting time, and as I sat here yesterday, I realized that you mentioned COVID, May. COVID took 10 years of time, or maybe 12 years of time, and jammed it into 24 months. Because we all sat here and watched the medtech and health tech industry accelerate certain technologies, push them forward, telehealth, some of the digital plays, the changing centers of care, May, as you mentioned. And then as soon as COVID died out, it was who we went to the dance with, we left. And there were a large number of tech companies that are probably in this audience, robotics, telehealth, certain digital plays, that are now not necessarily on the trajectory they were on. But we know, we've tasted digital. We know what it tastes like. And we can't imagine a world without it. So what are your opinions? Mark, I'll ask you. What's your opinion? What's the responsibility of the large strategics to make sure these innovators stay alive? And as an example, there are 200 robotic companies in R&D right now. 100 of them in soft tissue. Where are those other 98 going to go? And how do you make sure, as a strategic, they stay alive?
Yeah, so we were talking about competition earlier, and you talked about the effects of COVID. I think what COVID did, as you said, was open our eyes to the entirety of the care continuum and how to engage in ways that we never engaged with that before. And although we may not have the same dance partners that we did in the previous 24 months, that vision or the taste of that hasn't gone away. So where I think the competition is going is that we aren't competing in that corner at the very end of a disease process anymore. Now we're trying to think about how to compete in a constructive way across the entire care continuum. Robotics is a piece of that. Being able to intervene earlier, being able to intervene more precisely with a shorter hospital stay, that has its place in that continuum. But I think the big picture, that long view that May was describing earlier, is competing across the entire care continuum and competing constructively across the entire care continuum.
Steve, you are VP Tech, so you've got to keep your eyes on, I won't share what we were chatting about. We were chatting when we were on the side there.
Yeah.
You've got your eyes on certain technologies. And a lot of times you can determine like this. So how do you give guidance to the people who are out there who maybe the next 24 months may be tough for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll start by saying I think certainly we, and I think others in the kind of strategic space, are thinking differently than even 5 or 10 years ago. So 5 or 10 years ago, if we wanted a digital ecosystem, Medtronic would have had the idea that we could build that ourselves, organic, in-house, and we would have got there eventually, but it would have taken us way too long and very slow, right? Big elephants don't dance quickly. I think driven by COVID, but also just by the idea of open innovation, that there's too many smart people in too many places. Our view now is that a lot of these things ought to be done by ecosystems. So not a strategic owned closed walled garden, but something open where there's room for a lot of sensors, there's room for a lot of algorithms, there's room for a lot of diagnostics towards that care continuum. And so it's not necessarily a world where, we want to treat Parkinson's, diagnosis to end stage, except or more so that we need an ecosystem that has offerings along that, and we want to, obviously benefit from that both in our interventions, but also along the way. But that's not necessarily a Medtronic-owned thing anymore. And so I think that's part of the reason we're here, is to send that message and say, hey, there's a lot of room for collaboration, for partnership. If we can assemble these puzzle pieces in the right way, create value for patients in these chronic diseases who really need help, there's so much value to be created that we're happy to share. So I think it's a different model of innovation that we're certainly open to. That's why we're here and sending that message that, for the right puzzle pieces and the right puzzle, man, there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate.
May, as we were chatting about this session over the weeks, you used a term that was really interesting, the new gold rush. Would you share your thoughts on the new gold rush in regards to Medtronic's strategy moving forward?
Yeah, our CEO and our ex-con, shortly after I joined Medtronic, we had a very exciting dialogue and debate. So who will Medtronic be 5, 10, 15 years from today? Will we continue to evolve into a digital version of who we have been in the past 70 years? Or there is a lot more we can do, right? And we talked about the gold rush. So who made the most money? Who became rich from gold rush? Not necessarily the hardest working gold miners, but people who sold them picks, shovels, blue jeans. So when we started, validating our future, the new world with some of the hyperscalers or other ecosystem players, oftentimes we heard people asking us, oh, you are Medtronic. There are not many Medtronic out there. So what is your role in the future? We're looking for you to really help us to provide some Medtech shovels. So we can go and do this digital gold rush together with you guys and using your holy grail, clinical, medical, human device intelligence from the hospital, highly regulated environment. But we want to learn and we want to pay you guys for those Medtech shovels. If you create those, we want to buy from you and we want to use that to join in this digital gold rush. So that's really, how I brought up that topic in our early discussion.
May, you mentioned the word ocean, and Steve, I'll start with you on this. And I think about ocean, and I think about how irresponsibly people throw around the word digital in healthcare. And we all know that in order to convey and teach, you've got to have language. And in order to have language, you have to have agreed upon a dictionary. Has the industry agreed upon what the word digital and each of the components mean within it? And will it allow us to even have a cogent, reasonable point-to-point conversation these days?
Yeah, I don't. Certainly, industry hasn't agreed on it. I'm not even sure Medtronic has agreed on it. I'm not even sure the three of us would give you the same answer. But I think there's elements that are very common, and so we think about a big part of digital objective measures. So how do we measure something that previously wasn't measured objectively? And if you look around, a lot of disease, a lot of disorder states, neurodegeneration is a good example. All the measures are subjective. It's neurologists watching patients do stuff. It's timed up and go test. They're not great. They're not continuous measures. They're unavailable. We don't. They're poor. They're not rich. They're not high resolution. So objective measures for us is a big part of digital. Another big part of digital is is providing these kinds of services in different contexts of care. And so what can you do on an app that you used to do in a clinic? What can you do with a home screen or a wearable that used to be a diagnostic test? So that shifting of point of care or the collection of these kind of data is a second big part. And the third big part is sort of patient-centered, is that the digital often implies something that is patient-led, patient-directed, where the patient is more engaged in making decisions. So flipping that model of a physician tells you to, I'm engaged and I'm helping guide that process. So I think we would put those three elements together, objective data, and all that implies, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, the algorithms that use that data, the shifting of point of care and delivering more things outside of the hospital, and then the changing relationship between the patient and the clinician. Those are the ingredients. Everyone would mix a different cake out of those ingredients, I think. But I think those are probably the ingredients that would bubble to the top anytime you talk about digital.
So Mark, in that ocean of data and digital, most of us feel rudderless. What are your thoughts in that area?
So I'll go back to bridge from your earlier question that we have a lot more disciplines and technologies now that have the opportunity to participate in healthcare than we did before. And that both confounds the language issue or the dictionary problem, as well as creates exciting opportunities. And I think as we try to navigate this ocean and try to make sure that not only that we have a rudder, but that it's in the water and steering the boat, looking at one of the biggest changes is this transition out of the hospital. And now we have to bring along a customer, not just a patient, into the equation, and all of the complexities around language associated with that, but also the complexities around getting them to participate in the ecosystem in a seamless way. So we know that technology is mature when it becomes kind of a seamless part of your everyday life, and that's what we're trying to get to. So how do we take this explosion? When I think about digital, I think about cyber physical. We have to make this transition from sensing, so the physical world, into the digital world. We have tremendous explosion in compute, what we do with that data, AR, VR, AI, simulation, photorealistic rendering, like all this stuff. We have all this rich compute now that we never had before. And then we have to get back to actuation. So taking that digital and turning it into something that is impacting the physical world. And as we kind of work through all of this, I think this is where we have the exciting opportunity, and all of us have a role to play in making this as seamless as possible, despite the skills, despite the expertise or the backgrounds we might have, but working it seamlessly into the healthcare system.
May, do you ever get concerned about standing guard at such an early time in digital? And I get a feel that we're in a rush to put a flag in the ground and then start working around that flag. And then when you do that, you miss the balance of the focus of the horizon. But we're trying to rush to monetize the digital side. So do you stand guard at that, and how do you marshal near-term and long-term on those decisions? Because we all know, I think Steve said, it's hard to get the elephants to dance, not just Medtronic, but the billion-dollar strategics. Once they set on a flag, they point all their assets at that for the most part, and there's others walking the hallway going, well, what about this? This could be more important 5 years from now. How are you going to manage that?
I don't think we are early. As a matter of fact, I think in general, healthcare industry, Medtech, pharma are behind in embracing digital than the other industries. I came from high tech, right? And everybody knows the famous, quote from Mark Andreessen back in 2011: "Software is eating the world." And back in 2016 or 17, Jensen Huang, the CEO at NVIDIA, said famously, now AI is eating software while software is eating the world. And if you look around, if there is one, and I think AI and the software emerging technology is really broadly transforming all industries. Virtually all industries. But if there is one industry that is really giving digital some indigestion, that's us. And in return, I think digital is now giving us some indigestion. But it's not too late. All right, I think this is, time is now. This is perfect timing for us to really think harder how we actually dare to, embrace at a full speed the power of digital, the power of ecosystem-based digital transformation, because we have been doing the best in, hardware, medical device world. Now it's time to learn, new skills, expand our capabilities, and we cannot do it alone. But I know timing is perfect, but we need to do this, with, how we can tap into and fully leverage and integrate extended capability from beyond the medtech industry. So that's really our new job to be done for many of the digital leaders at Medtronic.
On that point, on the advancement outside of medtech, hardware, software, firmware, AI is got us, and Mark and Steve especially, as you build your teams. Now more than ever, my guess is you've each been in the industry for 20, 30 years. You look much younger, by the way, but 20, 30 years. How you recruit today and the people you're looking at bringing on board. We all remember if you didn't work in medtech up until about 10 years ago, you never got into medtech, right? You were never able to get past that gate. No medtech on the resume. And now the healthy organizations are on point looking for people who bring these skills in. So Mark, starting with you, and Steve, I want your insight on this. What does it look like as you look at talent now, so it's not an ideological thought process?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of points there. So one of them is many of us in this room who have gray hair or no hair like me are digital immigrants. We watched technology come online. We watched digital come online from analog. And the people that we're recruiting or the people that we want to collaborate with are digital native. And that's a different mindset. That's a different foundation than our generation has. And being able to leverage that and take advantage of that as we develop products for today and for tomorrow, that's a key skill. We mentioned language before. Increasingly, none of us can do this alone. And I have my area of expertise. Steve has his, May has hers. The people I'm hiring on my team, I'm going to hire a diverse team with many areas of expertise. And you mentioned language before. If we cannot communicate our area of expertise to each other or to the clinician or to the patient or the customer, it's not worth anything. So that is a key element of how we recruit our team. You have to be excellent in where you are, but you have to be able to communicate across to the people outside your expertise.
Yeah, I'll add on a couple of points. That communication is key both for collaboration, but also for recruiting. We've found that if we go head to head with Silicon Valley to try to recruit great data scientists, it's tough. But if we communicate what we're up to and the vision and the opportunity, the passion to treat patients, it gets a lot easier, and it becomes not a, how much, what's the California salary versus the Minnesota salary, which aren't the same, by the way. But it becomes about what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to recognize cats on Facebook, or do you want to help patients? And that becomes a very powerful recruiting tool. The other thing we found is that we don't have to do everything, and we can partner effectively, but it does require the right kind of communication skills and the right skill sets. And you think about machine learning as a way to answer questions from data. That's true. The really hard part, though, is asking the right questions. And we found that when you partner a neuroscientist with an analytics team, whether that analytics team is inside Medtronic or outside, we can be very productive. And so we're increasingly finding people who can ask the right questions, who are conversant in the tools and technologies, but are deep domain specialists. And that's a great bridge. And then it allows us to partner in a much more open way with different kinds of partners who may not be traditional medtech players, but who have that analytics skill. If we can bring the questions to them, we can answer them, we can all make progress together. So it's a different way of thinking about skill. Again, 10 years ago, we tried to hire someone and put them in the ecosystem and grow them for 30 years until they're an expert medtech developer. That's not the model anymore. We need people to ask questions. We need to find the right partners to answer them, and then that ecosystem can be healthy.
As leaders and managers, that's got to be fun for you because obviously you both are incredibly, intelligent players on this. And in the past, you probably had to manage and lead more of an I type organization. Now it's moved to a T type organization across that bandwidth. So how satisfying is that for you guys?
Tremendously. It's exciting, especially for some of us who have short attention spans. Being able to work across that matrix of technologies, across the matrix of applications in healthcare, across the care continuum. Are we focused on the patient in this application? Are we focused on the clinician in this application? I mean, it's so exciting. There's so much to do.
Yeah.
It's a target-rich environment.
And it's a great pattern matching opportunity. We've done some really interesting work in our brain data space, so where we try to record signals from brain that we think correlate with symptoms of Parkinson's, use those to understand the dosing of stimulation under variables like medication. So that sort of sensor, disruptor of medication and therapeutic of stimulation, that pattern is actually exactly the same pattern that we see in diabetes, where you're using continuous glucose monitoring across meals. The disruptor is nutrition to dose insulin. And so we've been able to sort of notice those patterns in time series data and then apply our learnings, our insights from our diabetes team back to brain and vice versa. And it becomes a very interesting sort of domain agnostic problem if we can find those patterns of who's doing time series data on that kind of measure, disruptor, response sort of pattern. We can start to fuse these learnings across businesses that don't otherwise look like they'd match. And so Mark said it well, it's a super fun problem, a super fun time, and it's driving these kind of non-traditional collaborations because of that underlying analytics pattern that's super interesting.
The same with me. I joined Medtronic about 10 months ago, and I was telling everybody, every day when I woke up in that past 10 months or even today, I feel like I'm a happy kid in a candy store. Still so much to learn. This is a great company with a great assets we have built in the past years. And not only we have actually been producing the life-saving products in the past decades, but we are actually leading the way to decode the most complex, most advanced system in the whole world. It's not iOS, Android, it's human body.
We're talking about digital, and we can look across many, many models when we talk about digital. And digital is supposed to be a democratization of healthcare. Supposed to be. Supposed to be. Having said that, the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, I view it, and others that I chat with, view it as a path of divergence of underrepresented people, economically strained people, rural people. The infrastructure is not there. Tier 1 hospitals, we know how they're supported, we know where they are, we know how they operate, and we know the budgets they have. But does anybody here have a concern, legitimately, personally, and professionally, of course, about this divergence that's about to occur? And how can we help mitigate that as much as possible? It's going to happen. We can't be blind. But what is the responsibility, the corporate responsibility, as well as our personal responsibility to manage that divergence that's going to occur?
And I'd like to add another thing to that list, which is the data piece and who has it. And that's an important piece, I think, to the equation as well, because if the data is being accumulated in the silos, there's also another haves and have-nots piece to consider that will constrain or limit the growth of the digitalization of healthcare. But to kind of speak to that question, democratization is key. I mean, one of the things that we've been thinking about inside Medtronic is we've done a lot of work on engineering. We've done a lot of work on understanding the pathophysiology of the diseases that we treat. How do we take that, and not just the hardware that we built for that, but how do we take that medical intelligence and then bring that out to democratize that and make it so that more people can play with us, they can accelerate their innovation. the whole health system will benefit from it. So I think that's part of our new understanding of our responsibility as a big med tech company is how to help with that democratization, dissemination, raising the tide so it raises all boats in the field.
Yeah, it's a fundamentally hard problem. But I'll say one way to not democratize is to require highly skilled, highly trained physicians at every step in the procedure, and whether that's surgery or diagnostic. And a lot of interventional care requires that. You need somebody who's fellowship trained or whatever. And so we think a lot about how and where can we use objective measures and data to shift that burden of interpretation from the expert onto the system. And we don't practice medicine, our systems don't practice medicine, but you can, in some cases, augment or inform that process in a way that reduces the burden of expertise and interpretation on the clinician. And anywhere we can do that, that fundamentally drives to open access. You can deploy that in more places, capacity gets bigger, it gets easier to do. And that doesn't solve all access problems, but that's one way that technology can at least help drive costs out of systems, requirements for expertise, requirements for infrastructure. Anytime you need a big imaging system in a hospital, you're not doing that in rural India. And so anytime you can pull that out and find an alternative way to get that information or to infer that information from a model, from data, from a digital twin, whatever, that's a door opening towards access.
Yeah. So ever since I joined Medtronic, I learned 6 powerful words, right? And that's our mission, which has been guiding Medtronic in the past decades. Elevate pain, restore health, extend life. Now with digital, we're breathing new life to our mission. Not only we want to extend life, we want to elevate life. Not only we want to extend or elevate life in hospitals, we want to actually be part of a driving force, how we actually improve the quality of life, the quality of care for people, not only just in the hospital. We'll continue optimize our business, right, our contribution in the hospital forward, but how we actually expand and activate our clinical power in everyday world, how we democratize the access to the high quality of care, not only just in large premium hospitals, but where you are in everyday life, everyday world. That's all about democratization. That's really the true north for Medtronic and many other companies in the whole world.
So how are we going to measure that? Because unless we measure something, you can't grade it. So how can we really measure the imbalance that is about to come upon us with this digital transition?
Today, we touch almost 80 million patients' lives, help people on an annual basis. So one key indicator that we are making tremendous progress in the future is how many more people's life we will actually touch and optimize in the future. I would imagine that will be not only in tens of millions, but in billions. If we dare to continue to grow our engagement, make people's life better in hospitals, but at the same time, when we actually expand it to the everyday world, touch people's life in every household, in everyday life.
Well, we're up on our 40 minutes here. I really appreciate it. I do appreciate Medtronic's having the courage to sit here and chat with me. Not many strategics will. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
And I
Thank you,
appreciate
Scott.
Scott's hosting this wonderful event and bringing in Medtronic as a partner. So thanks very much. Let's hear it for our panel, please.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to add one, maybe May can weigh in on this. I have one question for you, something that irritated me a little bit. We talked about the industry being behind, but I think what our industry is doing matters the most. Okay? So I would like to ask May to weigh in on how maybe this could be the start of a conversation that the LSI ecosystem and Medtronic's leadership, we start to talk about what we can do together, because truly what we do matters most in this world, I believe. And so let's get caught up as an industry. Maybe you could comment on that.
Yes, I think for large established corporations, everyone, including Medtronic, we continue to learn how to abandon not invented here mentality. Because the future is all about open innovation in the ecosystem context. That's why I'm so honored and excited to be part of LSI Europe Summit. And I will continue to engage with all of you here because we cannot do this alone. Nobody can do this alone. We need, partners, whether you are nimble startups or large corporations. We want to talk to you, and we want to actually see how we can win big together in the future. Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you.